everyone, welcome back to the Lee-Chandler Commercial Finance Podcast. And today we're having part two, a carry on from our discussion from last week with Next Generation Trust. We have Brittany as well as Scott, and of course, our co-host, Hank Hunt. So first, let's start off with Hank, and then we'll do a round robin on our guest. Hank, welcome back.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. Life happens. We have to deal with it. And, I've learned over the years that people say family is important, but all too often we put family on the back burner, trying to climb the rope of success. And I just say, if family is important, let them know it and show it to them. So I'm happy to be back, and I'm sorry I missed it last week.
Oh, that's okay. We blame you for everything that happened. So it works out perfectly. So welcome back to our amazing guest. Brittany, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Happy to be here again for round two.
Round two. And Scott, how are you doing?
Doing outstanding today, Leland. Happy to be for our second session. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. And Scott, speaking of, man, is that Italy behind you?
You are really good. You know what? It's almost been like a little ploy I've been doing. As Brittany would remember, I've been doing my monthly huddles with our team here. And I want that behind us. And I've done Zoom meetings. I even did a Zoom meeting where people drew pictures and they drew the picture behind me. No one's ever asked what is that picture of? And you're dead on. It's Italy. It's my wife's village, the village her family is from in Italy.
Wow. Okay.
It's called, I believe it's called Tricatico, and it's about an hour outside of Naples.
Okay, hour outside of Naples. And then this is interesting because today is Tuesday, and Hank, as you know, Sophia is traveling back to Italy today.
Yes, she is. One of our interns.
Yeah, and she's a native of Italy. So I'm going to ask her and say, hey, have you been and say it one more time for me, Scott, sorry.
It's Tricatico.
Tricatico. Okay. Awesome. I learned something new just now, right?
I'm like amazed that you were able to, from that picture, I could barely see it on my screen. So the fact that you were able to pick out that's Italy, and then you picked out the what was it, Hank, who picked up the basketball player last time, which was Jason Kidd.
Jason Kidd, yeah, but I mean, come on, guys, really? It's Jason Kidd.
The other thing was a beer sign. That's easy to pick.
Who's he?
So this is great. All right, so I learned something new, and if you're listening to the podcast, that means you guys are going to learn something new as well, because today we have a few amazing things to cover. One of them is being myth busting, okay? Myth busting. So if you listened last time, then everyone knows that Next Generation Trust is who you all should go to when it comes to self-directed investing, okay? Self-directed investing. The issue is that there's a lot of myths, in my opinion, that people have in reference to self-directing, and they allow that to discourage them from actually making a wise choice. So, for our guests here today, are we ready to go into myth busting?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. All right. And these are just some questions that I've received, and then Brittany is also going to share additional questions that she and Scott receive as well. Okay. So the first question that I have had people ask me is, hey, can I actually invest in gold through a self-directed account?
All right, Scott, you want me to take this one?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So precious metals can be held in a self-directed IRA. Gold does qualify as one of the types of precious metals that can be owned and held in an IRA. There are actually 4 types of metals. So gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. The IRS will allow. They can be bullion bars or they can be coins. There are certain types of coins that are allowed as long as they don't fall into like a antique coin or collectible coin category. So the IRS does have a list of those acceptable coins. Typically, if you're purchasing precious metals with your IRA, you work with your IRA custodian, which is the company that holds your account and provides your administration. You also select a broker that you're going to buy the metals from, and you agree on pricing with them and quantities. And then together you work with your broker and your custodian to process the transaction to purchase those metals. And then there is another party that you have to include, because owning them in an IRA is a little bit different than owning them like if you were just going to buy them yourself and like have them in your basement or whatever. The IRS doesn't allow you to hold precious metals personally if you own them with your IRA. So they do have to be held at what's called a depository, which is basically a financial institution that's going to store your metals for you. And typically they'll allocate them and so that you know where your metals are and you can locate them or see them virtually, or you could go to the depository and see them, but you're not able to hold them yourself. However, the short answer to your question is yes, you can.
It's called fee for service, right?
If we're going to bust the myth, we're going to completely bust it.
Completely bust it.
We're going all the way.
So essentially, what I'm hearing, I have interpreted this as, if I want to be Scrooge McDuck, and maybe take some of that gold from my swimming pool that I would dive into, I could basically send it to Next Generation Trust, and then also you said have a repository, depository, and keep it there, right?
Right. Correct.
Awesome. And so I know some people, man, that they are, people are fanatics over Bitcoin. I know a few guys who are fanatics over gold. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we have a friend.
A few
Oh,
that are
yeah.
that are like gold fanatics. So this is great news, and we'll let them know that, hey, you can take some of that gold. All right, you don't have to keep looking at it, polishing it, putting it under your pillowcase, and you can do something. You can do something else with it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Okay, so you mentioned gold. You mentioned platinum, right? Silver, is that right? And
palladium.
Palladium. Okay. So what can't I invest in? What can someone not invest in through a self-directed account?
The only two exceptions that the IRS has actually documented are life insurance policies and collectibles or antiques. So that's why when we talk about precious metals and gold and silver, there are some limitations, because if something by their definition falls into a collectible category, it would be off limits. So other things they might consider collectibles would be like, antique rugs, or like card collections or wine collections, unfortunately. So yeah, anything that falls into those two categories is not allowed in an IRA, but just about anything else that's not publicly traded is game for at least consideration.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Get pretty creative.
Yeah, I see Hank is thinking about a few things to actually to throw in there.
But again, I look at it in the sense that it's fascinating that floodgates, to use a vernacular, are opened to individuals, but it still has guardrails to protect you from unscrupulous individuals and or from naivete or stupidity.
It also, I think, comes down to the fact that the IRS, let's face it, the IRS makes money off taxes, right? Off taxing people. So being that an IRA is a tax advantaged account, individuals may try to get around or avoid paying taxes by putting specific types of things in these accounts, and there's certain things that they're just not okay with passing off on. So they set the rules. There are certain limitations, but on the other side, it really is also for the benefit of the IRA itself. So a lot of times people will come up with these investment ideas and they want to use their IRA, but really when you look at the situation, they're trying to just get money fast, or they're trying to do something that's going to benefit them personally, and just using the IRA as a tool in that, whatever it is. But the idea of retirement accounts, right, is long-term investing. So it's also sort of designed to protect people from themselves, if you will, to not allow just anything in an IRA. But obviously, but you're right, Hank, there are so many other opportunities and options out there that most people are not aware of that can be held in IRAs, and they have that choice. So just knowing about it gives you the ability to make those different choices. So that's why we're here, and that's what we do, is provide this type of education. And busting the myths is important too, because people who may not have had access to this type of education may have just heard about this from their friends or maybe just people in passing, and they may hear different things or pieces of things that may not represent the whole truth. So we just want to make sure that we're providing that education to people who want to really learn and understand it fully, so that when they're going into making these decisions, they feel really good about what they're doing and that they feel informed and confident about that.
That's good. And it takes away the excuse where someone may say, you know, yeah, I would love to invest in my future or build up some kind of retirement, but, you know, I hate the stock market. You know, I hate mutual funds, so I don't want to do anything. So this takes away that excuse, because as long as it's legal, you can do a lot of things. So the world is basically your oyster.
Right. And just because you may not want to, not you personally, but just because someone may not want to invest in stocks or mutual funds, it doesn't mean that they can't have tax advantages to their investment. So I think people either feel that it's either I put into the market and I can get those tax advantages, or I have to just do it myself and pay my own taxes. And that's not the only option. There are other options.
So, Brittany, what I think I'm hearing you say is, if you've got some assets that you're thinking about putting into an IRA, self-directed IRA, do the research, get educated before you go out and basically lose the farm, so to speak.
Yes, definitely. Especially because with self-directed investing, this isn't typically the usual setup you think about, where you might have like an IRA at Fidelity and then you have an advisor, and that advisor is telling you what you should invest in, and these investments that they're presenting to you have been, pre-approved or whatever. One of the great benefits of the self-directed side of things is you have so many more options, but at the same time, you also have the responsibility of then taking on whatever risk is associated with that investment and doing your own due diligence. So you do definitely have to be educated and understand your role in the process is a little bit different than if you were just hiring an advisor to take care of everything for you. So you're a little bit more involved.
Yeah. And so for anyone who's listening, when someone mentions self-directed investing, I think the key word in there is self, right? Self-directed investing. So as far as someone, moving things around, these are things that you're going to invest in that you are most comfortable with and that you feel as though you're ready, you're prepared, you have the track record. So for example, if you want to invest into someone else's business, and we'll talk about the question I get a lot from other people, if you want to invest in someone else's business, that's something you can do, but you want to do your own due diligence and figuring out whether that's an investment that you want to make. So that's really important. The other thing too, and Hank and I we had a discussion with someone yesterday in reference to this gentleman who was buying a laundromat. And I made a comment and I said, only idiots take the full sell amount. Like only idiots basically take the full sell amount. And what I was saying was, when someone is, okay, I'll put it this way. Imagine that you have a cow, and imagine that cow produces milk. You could kill that cow, all right? Have the best steak in your life, have the best, the last gallon of milk in your life, and maybe you could sell that later on, whatever else, but that cow will never, ever produce any more milk for you. A retirement account is meant to preserve a cow, okay? People too often, from people that I speak to, they're thinking that, okay, I take this cow and I'm going. This is basically what they're saying metaphorically. I'm going to take that cow. I'm going to cut that cow up in like 4 or 5 parts, and then in a few months, that cow is going to replicate itself, and then like produce more cows. It's like, dude, no. You're killing the cow. So you have to decide, okay, if you have a cow, put that cow in your pasture, for example, or in your barn, and now let that cow meet a steer or whatever else, and let that cow no, truly, like, grow and develop and produce. But while that's happening, you need to go out and find another cow. And if that's the cow you want to milk off of or whatever else, or you want to eat that cow, whatever, do that. When I was selling, I used to sell, I used to sell seed to farmers, and even wise farmers know the difference between a dairy cow and a beef cow.
Mhm.
Dairy cows has more longevity. A beef cow, it has a cycle. Okay. And once that cycle comes up, even the cow knows, like, I never saw my mom this old before, so it's time for me to go ahead and put my head in there, right? So, if anyone who's listening and you're thinking about retirement is going to happen, or at least that retirement age is going to happen. So why not put as many livestock in your barn now instead of waiting for later? And if you end up turning all your cows into beef cows and killing them, they can't grow, they can't develop, they can't matriculate, they can't multiply. And that's all I'm gonna say on that part. Go ahead, Hank. There's something you wanted to add. Sorry.
No, I just like the example, the metaphor, that you created. You sound like you're from the country.
I am. Believe it or not, people don't know that. I'm an agriculture type of guy.
Oh, okay.
I'm an Aggie. So yeah, that's just, and Brittany and Scott, I apologize, guys, for getting on that pedestal. But I'm annoyed when people look at things like self-directed IRA, and they think that it's like a bank account. It is not.
Mm-hmm.
And just think about it. Whether you took an accounting course, you understand debits and credits, or just you have a checking account and a savings account. Well, the savings account is meant to have a different type of function than the checking account. That's just typically how they work. So if you're looking to invest for your IRA or 401k, you're just long-term investing, that's something that's long-term. That's not something that's meant to be short-term. So,
Right.
all right. So this is the question I get a lot. I get this question a lot. I normally get this question from, it doesn't matter, male, female, whatever, whoever is earning or whoever believes that they're the head of the household, and they immediately hear like, oh my goodness, I can invest in a business. I'm like, yeah, you can invest in a business, make sure, blah, blah. Okay, great. So I can invest in a small business? Like, yes, you can invest in a small business. And the next thing is, can I invest in my husband's business? It's like, you know what? So Brittany, if you can you answer that question? Can someone invest in their spouse's business?
Sure, I can answer the question. So I think the best way to answer this would be to provide some guidance around the IRS limitations. And one of the things that the IRS has done to sort of place some parameters around investors using accounts for different things is to define what they deem prohibited transactions. So any investment that takes place between an IRA and what they call a disqualified person is prohibited, meaning it is not allowed, can't be done. Disqualified persons are people that are defined in relation to the account holder. So for example, Hank, if you have a self-directed IRA, disqualified persons to your IRA would be you personally, your spouse, and then any of your ascendants, descendants, or their spouses. So if you think about your family tree, like lineal directions, right? So those relationships to you and your IRA are disqualified from doing any direct investments with your IRA. However, when we talk about a business that is owned by a spouse, the question then becomes, what percentage of ownership do they have of that business? Because the IRS only considers it disqualified if they have majority ownership. So if it's 50% or more owned by the spouse, or any combination of those individuals that are disqualified people. If it's not, then technically they could invest in it. Now, there may be other questions to ask, and usually this is where a custodian would come into the conversation and start to maybe dig a little deeper to understand, okay, what role are you going to play? Who's getting paid for what? Because again, it goes back to understanding who is truly benefiting from this investment. Is this really for the benefit of the IRA, or are we trying to use the IRA to get into something else, right? But on the surface, if it's not majority owned, yes, you could. If they have 50% or more ownership, no, you cannot.
That's awesome. Hank, was there something you wanted to add? I saw
No,
you were...
I was just thinking, because there are people who are always trying various shenanigans, and that's why having, in my opinion, having experts advise on the can and cannots, the do's and do nots. Pay them, pay an attorney $350 for an hour of information, or it might be 15 minutes. You got to pay the piper now, or you're gonna pay the piper later, and later could be astronomical,
Yep.
So don't, and I tell people all the time, don't listen to the advice of your cousin, your friend, your friend's friend. Just because they supposedly call themselves this, that, or the other, that could be a very, very costly decision for you.
That's good. The next question we have is, do I have to be a certain age to invest in a self-directed account?
So really, in order to have a self-directed IRA, the only qualification someone needs to have is to be able to have an IRA in general. So U.S. earned income and a tax ID number. So technically, if you have those two things, you can have an IRA. Now, if you, that is assuming that you are not a minor, that you're an adult or age of majority. However, technically, Roth IRAs can even be open for minors if they are making if they're generating some sort of income. So we actually had a family of clients that had opened Roth IRAs for their children because their children were in modeling or something like that. So because they were generating money, they were making money, they were able to have accounts. But generally speaking, there's no minimum amount required to have an IRA. It is encouraged to think about the investments that you want to do and what amount in funding would be required for you to even make the investments. It's usually more so driven by that than age or any other factors. But of course, if it is a very small amount of money, then you would also want to weigh that against the fees that you would be required to pay just to determine whether it makes financial sense to do it. But there really is no limitation from an age perspective. And one of the things that we're actually trying to focus more on is reaching the millennial market on this whole topic, because I think we're seeing a lot more millennials start their own businesses, and there's a lot more interest in entrepreneurship and innovation, but there's not yet a lot of interest or focus on planning for retirement, because most millennials are just like, whatever, that's, you know, decades
I
away,
got
I'm not
time.
thinking about that. But like to your analogy, Leland, you know, get the cows now. So we are, and I think that that starts with like providing this education, especially to millennials, because that's going to be the next generation, pun intended, that's really going to be impacted by changes in the economy and, you know, changes in the retirement landscape. So yeah, there's really no reason for anyone to not consider.
And you mentioned, Brittany, you mentioned the changes in the retirement landscape. And it's, I mean, it's happening. There are laws that are being enacted that employers and government and municipalities are no longer have to fully fund any type of retirement for individuals. So if you're not thinking, if you're not putting away money now, you know, 15 years down the road, may be too late for you. And then if you, you know, if you, then when you get to 65, you have to consider that you may live to be 85. So the question is, what are you going to do for that 20 years, you know, when you run out of money before you run out of month, you know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. That gap between what people have and what they need to have is actually just, it's getting greater and greater
Yes, it is.
as time goes on. And, you know, on this one side, as you said, it's coming from the fact that people are living longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe people don't want to work for the rest of their lives, which can we blame them? And then on the other side, the net that people had to rely on, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is diminishing. So that like Social Security, will we even have it? Who knows, right? That we can't rely on that. And as you had just mentioned, those lifetime benefits, pension plans, those are so rare now, that we don't have any of that to rely on anymore. So what happens is now it's on us to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? And sitting back passively isn't going to be enough. So one of the benefits of a self-directed IRA is the ability to get in there and like take a little bit more control over what you're doing with your funds.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if investors have these specific investments in mind that they know are going to generate good returns, and it's more than they're going to get in the markets, then that might be an option for them to consider to accelerate that growth, to close that gap. Because that's ultimately what everyone wants, is close that gap.
Close the gap. Yeah. Well, and I'm sitting here, and I'm thinking there are individuals, and Leland, you and I sort of touched on this some time ago. There are individuals who are afraid to invest in the stock. They're afraid to do a lot of things, so they're just stacking their money up in a local bank. They're getting zero interest, so it's not growing. If they, you know, and eventually that's all they've got, because there's still some talks about what's going to happen to social insecurity. You know, so people are going to have to take their head out of the sand and become somewhat aggressive in how their future lifestyle, whatever that is. And, you know, and now is the time. I mean, now is that sense of urgency that I think that people need to consider, period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in on something that Leland said when he was going through the cow analogy, because he said something that I thought was pretty profound, but we kind of skipped over it, that he had mentioned retirement and then retirement age. And I think that's important to make the distinction, because there is a retirement age, but just because there's a retirement age doesn't mean you're going to be able to retire at that age. And that's really important, because also to what Hank said, you know, it's never too late to start trying to invest for your future, even if you're way behind, because all you have is time and you don't know how long that time horizon will last. Many people are going to spend more time living in their retirement years than they did in the workforce itself. in some instances, because the mortality rate is much greater than it used to be. It used to be like you would have a pension plan, you'd retire at 65, and then you die at 68, and your spouse would get your money. Like now, it's a lot different. So I just wanted to pop in on that because it was just bouncing around in my head, and I thought that was pretty profound. So I wanted to make sure we got back to that before it kind of escaped my brain, because things don't stay in there very long.
Well, Scott, yesterday we were talking about high earners, physicians, attorneys, perceived high earners. And when you consider the impending or the proposed tax rewrites that are being considered, these guys are already leaving almost half the money on the table. And then when you look at the fact that they've got possibly student loan debt and kids in private school, they're trying to live this high life when they don't have the resources to sustain themselves. So that's why they're putting in 60, 80 hours a week, and they're working until they die. They're working until they die, not because they like doing what they're doing. That's what they'll tell you. But trust me, if they could retire comfortably at 45, they had enough money in that stream, that cow was producing enough milk and enough butter and enough offspring for them to eat the rest of their lives, they would not be. Anyway, let me hush.
They wouldn't hesitate. And Hank's right.
Spoil.
Hank's right, because we do have some clients that go through that, and then people eventually tell you, man, honestly, I would love to be able to retire in the next 10 years, right? And the difference is that when someone is in their, let's say their 40s or their 20s or their 30s, that's not a thought. And the truth is, at some point, we all get older. So it's not something that anyone can escape. At some point, we all get older. Everyone gets old.
I'm past
older. Everyone gets
it's like, okay, any day now.
everyone gets older. And so to think that you don't have to be mindful of that it's absurd.
Yeah, but Leland, think of it. You don't have to be mindful of it. But the reality is, it's happening.
It's going to happen.
This is not something you can outrun.
No. I look at just different athletes that I like, and even growing up, that I enjoyed watching. And then I look at what they're doing, and I'm like, man, this was the guy that I thought was invincible. But like, man, he didn't think about what would happen at 50. That's crazy. He knew he was going to be 50. I'm thinking about stuff like that. But it's the same thing just for anyone else.
Yeah.
Anyone else. Yeah. And so now is the best time to do it. And especially for my future, I was going to say my future countrymen, for my future or for my current millennials, right? Please hear me closely. As a millennial, I know that we are bombarded with all of these get rich quick ventures, stocks. I even have people that like, hey man, did you check out the new Bitcoin or the new whatever the currency is? Even things like, what's that app that people can trade on? I forgot. Robinhood, right? Even things like that. It's like, man, all those are cool if you want to do those things, if it's fun, if it's exciting, if you trust it. But what are you going to do for yourself that's outside of the traditional stock market? Because unfortunately, what I have seen, I tell my friends this, like, dude, you did see that someone made a silly tweet and that particular currency dropped, like cut in half, right? Like, oh yeah, but no worries. He's not going to tweet like that anymore because he knows how important it is. I'm like, bro, if someone can tweet something and the value drops, that means that you have no control over it. You have no control over it. So at the worst thing, at least what you can do is start putting some money aside into something that you have more control over. And self-directed investing is a great way to do that. So that's just my tad bit. That's not next gen endorsing or nothing like that. I'm just telling you guys the truth, the discussions I have with my friends. Invest in something that you have a little more control over. If you still want to gamble in the stock market, have fun, gamble, do your thing. But as we talked, as Hank mentioned in our meeting yesterday to someone who's gambling in Las Vegas right now, try to bring home some wins if you can. And
I didn't send him any money.
I know that you didn't send him any money, right? Because they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, sometimes people go broke in Vegas too, okay,
Yeah.
and they end up staying there. So try to invest in something that you have more control over. That's all I'm gonna say on that. So
Wait, just a little interesting side on that. I remember when I went to Vegas, when we were landing, and maybe the pilot was a little, sour grapes. But he said, enjoy your stay in Vegas, but just remember, the city was built by losers, not by winners.
Touche.
I was like, wow, that's pretty profound from a pilot. I don't know if he had experience or what, but
he flew in too many times. That's what happened. Okay, the next question, next myth busting is, can I access my money whenever I want? Can I treat this like a checking account, basically?
Okay, so there are a couple different options when investing with a self-directed IRA to actually perform investment transactions. The first option is to directly invest in something in the name of the IRA. So for example, if you wanted to lend money to somebody and do some private lending out of your IRA, then the name of the lender on that promissory note would be the actual IRA name. Same if you were to purchase real estate and you bought rental property, it would be deeded to the IRA. In that case, where the IRA directly invests in an asset, the custodian or the administrator of the IRA will have regular oversight as far as what transactions and payments are taking place in and out of the IRA. So if someone wanted to make a payment out of their IRA, they would authorize that payment for the custodian to process. So that's the first option, and the benefit of that option is that the custodian having oversight on all of the different transactions offers additional layer of compliance, if you will. So if the custodian were to catch something that, as we talked about before, might be a prohibited transaction, they would see that and stop them and not process it, obviously. The con to that option is people are used to, or people who are expecting, like you said, to have access to the money like a checkbook is not necessarily going to be the case. And it may take a little bit longer to process the investment itself because it's going to go through a layer of review with the custodian to approve it and process it, etc. The other option for investing with a self-directed IRA is what we call the IRA LLC option. And it's often referred to and commonly known, word on the street, is it's checkbook IRA. So that's what you had mentioned, the word checkbook. In that option, the IRA holder essentially forms a new LLC with an attorney, and then the IRA becomes a member of the LLC. So the IRA would fund it, like the IRA owns that LLC. The owner of the IRA, so again, if we're going back to Hank's IRA, if Hank lists his IRA on the operating agreement as member of the LLC, and then Hank lists himself, Hank Hunt, as manager of the LLC, then Hank actually can access the business checking account where his IRA funds are going to be held for that LLC, if that makes sense. So that would then give him that, what we call checkbook control, to open a debit card for the checking account or write checks if needed for different purchases or transactions. So the pro, which I think is pretty obvious to that one, is having that quick access to the funds. So you have a little bit more freedom to, like, if you were going to go to auction and buy a property, grab your checkbook or whatever, you show up there, you can write a check on the spot and get something. The downside to that, everything has pros and cons. Downside to that is less oversight by the custodian, because what happens is once you take your IRA and then you invest in that LLC you created, custodian then does not see day-to-day what you're doing in that LLC. They don't have day-to-day oversight of all the different transactions you're doing. So it just becomes ever more important if somebody really wants that checkbook control, and that really makes sense for their situation, because it's not always necessary. But if they feel after weighing the options that that is the best option for them, then they need to take their responsibility as well, though, to make sure that they understand all the IRS rules and regulations, because it's pretty much on them for the most part to not do a prohibited transaction. So those are the two options available, and pretty much anyone can choose either option. It's just a matter of, and there's really not a right or wrong option. It's a matter of understanding the differences, and then depending on what someone's looking to do, which makes most sense for them.
Goes back to stay within the guardrails, and the only way you're going to know what the guardrails are is to get good advice. Don't leave it to your own devices to know what you can and can't, should or shouldn't be doing. Get advice from the experts, and then follow that advice religiously.
Education, I would say, and we definitely provide guidance as well. We don't provide the financial advice because we're not financial advisors, but that guidance as far as, here's what you can and can't do. Here's how you can go through the proper steps and go through the proper channels to set things up. Taking the time up front for investors to go through that process and not try to rush into this thing. Definitely worth it, because the last thing you want to do is jeopardize your retirement account, of course. So.
And I would just say to Hank, just because at the very end you dropped religion in there, sometimes they say in religion it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. When you're dealing with an IRA, it's better to ask for permission. There is no forgiveness.
The IRS doesn't forgive.
And and it's something when we're dealing with did an orientation with some interns today, and it was talking about ethics. And I can remember hearing John Maxwell talk about, he was on a plane flying from point A to point B, and he was on with some highfalutin business guy. And the business guy asked him, John, can I get your perspective on business ethics? And John said, he looked at the guy and said, business ethics? He said, man, ethics is ethics. And the point I'm making to you is, hey, what does your gut tell you? If you know the rules, what does your gut tell you? If there's a pregnant pause, no offense, if there's a pregnant pause in your analyses, don't do it. Yoda says, do it or nothing, don't try. I mean, just no. If you get ready to do something and you ask yourself a question, you got to do the research.
Right.
That's what we also tell investors who decide to use, if they decide to go with that LLC option, even if they're using the LLC, if they're about to do something and they're not sure, please call the office and ask, or at least run it by, or even as someone had said, spend the money. I think Hank, you said it, spend a little bit of money on an attorney's opinion up front, rather than when things are blowing up trying to go and get help. Especially with this sort of strategy, it's not the way to go with large sums of money.
Be safe rather than sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Fire is great. It's great to cook, but it can also kill you. And I think a great quote for this question is, God forgives, the IRS does not. Brittany, you had mentioned that you guys normally have a few questions that will also go into myth busting.
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief because I know we're getting there on time. But so the first one, and I guess we kind of addressed it, but the first one is that self-directed IRAs are only for very wealthy people. That used to be the thought, but in fact, anyone can be successful with a self-directed IRA. As we said, there's no minimum required. You just need U.S. earned income and a tax ID. And then as long as you educate yourself, and work with the custodian to follow the proper procedures, anyone can be successful. The second one is there's only one type of self-directed IRA. So oftentimes we will speak with investors and we'll ask them, okay, you'd like to self-direct, what type of IRA would you like to open? And they'll say, well, the self-directed IRA. But when we look back and we remember that there are different account types when we think about IRAs that are treated differently from a tax perspective, it's important to make a decision about that. So self-directed just refers to the ability to invest in the private alternative assets and choose your own investments. But when you're establishing an actual IRA, an account, you still have to select a type, which could be traditional, tax deferred, a Roth IRA. If you're a business owner, it could be SEP, simple, a solo 401k, or other types of qualified plans. So there are actually a lot of different options available to choose from. And then that becomes a whole other category to be educated on. Sometimes when we speak to investors, they're already familiar with the differences, and sometimes they're not. So then it also becomes an educational conversation about just retirement plans in general. And then the last one that we get sometimes is if someone invests in real estate through their IRA, and then the proceeds go back into their account when they sell the property, or if they're renting it, proceeds go back as rental income, that they're only limited to what the IRS will allow them to contribute each year. So I think most of us are familiar with the fact that the IRS has contribution limits for IRAs on an annual basis. And sometimes there's confusion around what's considered a contribution. So a contribution is just taking money out of pocket from your own checking or savings, for example, and then depositing it into an IRA to try to grow and build it over time. But of course, you're still taking, when the funds are in your IRA, you're taking them and hopefully you're strategically investing them to try to accelerate that growth. So when your funds are already in your IRA and you've invested them in something and then you make money and it goes back in, that's not considered a contribution. That's considered investment earnings, and those are not limited at all. There is no limit to the amount you can earn in a self-directed IRA. So the contribution limits only refer to the money that you're putting in out of pocket on a yearly basis, not limiting what you can make on your investments. Those are the three we get a lot.
I like the last one. There's no limit. If it's, if it's used to generate revenue or income, there's no limit. As long as what you're doing is legal, the amount.
Right.
There's no limit on the amount.
That's awesome. Yeah. I want to go into this last quick segment. Can you guys share with us, maybe, I know we're running very, very, very low on time. Can you guys share with us maybe one or two wins or just win scenarios of people who have used, or how people have used self-directed strategies?
Well, one real quick that's kind of popular. Real estate, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know it's the most utilized part of the self-directed IRA. It's the most utilized strategy in a self-directed IRA with all the other options out there, real estate, and it encompasses a lot. When you're looking at something like a buy and hold scenario, that's a good win for people who want to invest. When they find a piece of property that they want, they use their IRA to purchase it. And if they're holding, say it's a vacation home, all the rent that gets paid to that vacation home for use of that vacation home basically is like a return on the investment. It's just like those are the shares that you're getting back for your investment. So when you do a buy and hold with real estate and it's a property that's generating a lot of income, you're going to see a really nice return on that. And people have also used a fix and flip strategy where they'll buy the house, fix it up and flip it. And then, you know, just say for argument's sake, round numbers, you put $100,000 on the house, you put 25,000 into the property, and then you turn around and flip it for 200,000, you made a $75,000 return on your investment in, you know, 6 months or so. So those are just a couple of really quick high-level overview strategies that people can benefit from. Another one, cryptocurrency is very popular now. You have a couple options. We are working with someone that works with a few of the most popular cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, Bitcoin, things like that. Or you can use an LLC, as Brittany alluded to earlier, to invest in a cryptocurrency. You get what's called a digital wallet. But you know, just I know I'm kind of going really quick, but those are just a couple of options you can get a nice return on your investment.
Scott, I like the last one. I think it was a couple weeks ago, I read something that says that the IRS is looking at ways to tax cryptos from a capital gains perspective. So I don't know whether I'm not trying to dispute what you're saying. I'm just making a comment that people need to monitor what may happen or what's impending if they strictly go to the crypto route, only because of a lot of dark money allegedly goes in that direction. So that you know, again, crypto's all well and good. Just be aware of the pending tax implications.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Leland brought it up before, the volatility. One person tweets, and if he's an influencer, the market will tank or people will buy like crazy. So the volatility is definitely there. I more wanted to address it because it's becoming popular.
Understand.
You know, because we're not fiduciaries, by no means do we make a recommendation on go for it or don't go for it. But it is becoming more and more popular as an investment. And, you know, like most investing, if it's becoming popular now, maybe some people missed the boat on. You know, maybe the boat was a few months ago, but there is a lot of volatility to it. But it is a very popular investment at this point. And I guess, Hank, you also had a good point. With IRS looking at it, you know, they're trying to figure out what to do with it because it's kind of like a universal currency. It doesn't belong to any in particular country. You know, they're trying to figure out how can we get our tax money. Brittany had said that early on. The IRS's primary purpose is to generate tax revenue. So that's what they want to do. So they got to figure out, how am I going to get the tax from this? And that's why it's sort of this really kind of weird environment right now with what's going on with it.
Well, something else that we were talking about cryptos way back when. Everybody was hot to trot on Bitcoin, and I think it dropped from like 50,000 to like 38,000 overnight or something crazy. But the point is, I just went out and just started to do a little bit of research on cryptos. I was absolutely amazed as to the number of cryptos that are out there. I mean, everybody's trying to create a crypto.
I'm gonna make my own. I'm gonna build my own coin, by the way. So just because I'm gonna call the HH coin, the Hank Hunt
just
coin.
let me know before you go to market so I get in on it early.
That's right. But I wanna tie this in for everyone who's listening. The beauty with working with Next Generation Trust is that if you're listening, is that you're able to pick up the phone and call them or email them and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about doing this. Are there any do's or don'ts in reference to me doing this with my self-directed account? And that in itself will save people a lot of trouble, right?
And I would just, Leland, I would add to that. Only the serious people should pick up the phone and call.
True.
Because these individuals they have more to do than just listen to you pontificate about something, unless you're serious. Then if you're serious, they can help you. If you're not serious, then just leave it alone, you know, and do like anything else that's happening, you know, but don't waste their time because you're trying to get smart. Or
if you're, so I do know people who don't always want to pick up the phone because they're afraid. Okay. If that's the case, you guys can still go to Next Generation Trust, go to their website. Yeah. They have a slew of information, webinars, telewebinars, white paper, blogs, articles that you can use to self-educate, and probably some of the questions that you have will be answered by actually going through that information. So at this point, there's not an excuse for anyone anymore as far as, nope.
I'm not too old.
Nope. Not too old, not too young, not too smart, and not too the other one either, right?
You're bad.
There is no excuse for anyone anymore. So Brittany, Scott, if you guys have any closing statements, the floor is yours.
I'll let Scott take it this time if he has any closing remarks. I know I held us up last time at the end with a lot.
No, I would actually just say, listen, I've enjoyed this. This has been great. And thank you for plugging the website, because that's what I was going to say, kind of to Hank's point. That's a great kind of resource to educate yourself about what it is we do. We have webinars on there that we've produced in the past. We have white papers. We even have professional resources page where there are attorneys and other people we've worked with before who could provide some information to anybody who's interested. So the website is definitely a great place to start, but feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to address your question. It's all about education. That's really what our main role is. We want to educate people to make sure that if they want to invest in a self-directed IRA or any self-directed retirement plan, that we provide them with the most accurate information possible.
I heard an expression years ago that there are the curious and the serious. The curious go to the website and check out whatever the hell you want to check out. The serious pick up the phone and call them and talk to somebody who can then help you to pull the trigger on what it is that you want to get done. So I say, be serious about your future.
Amen.
Amen.
I agree.
All right. Well, that's it. Thank you guys so much. And we'll catch you on the next one.
All right, Leland. You have a
Thanks for having
wonderful
us.
day. Hank, take care.
Hey,